attention, ladies and gentlemen, please. Could you... Okay, very good morning. I welcome you all here for our session on satellites for SDGs. Space technology can contribute significantly to achieve sustainable development goals. Satellites can help monitor and mitigate climate changes, support sustainable urban planning, identify areas with high potentials for renewable energy, protect biodiversity, and provide education to underserved communities. So today's event will be chaired and moderated by Dr. Sudheer Kumar, Director CBPO, ISRO Headquarters. Sir, can we have you on stage, please? Dr. Sudheer. Please, can we have a good round of applause for them? I would like to invite the speakers for the event, Mr. Stephane Chenard, Senior Associate Consultant, Euroconsult. Very warm welcome, sir. We have Captain Arvind, Pandey, Senior Fellow, Geospatial Intelligence in Military Operations, Center for Air Power Studies. Very welcome, sir. Also, we have with us Mr. Abhishek Krishnan, Chief of Staff, Pixxel. Ms. Dechacca, Ponappa, Business Development, Aerospace and Satellite Services, AWS. I guess we are looking for a very eventful discussion, and I would like to leave it to the chair and moderator, Dr. Sudheer. Please, sir. Thank you.
Thank you, the organizers. It's a lovely session, probably more active, more engaged, and more important so. See, ultimately, if you see the different domains of satellite, let's say, applications, which is very prominent, but obviously which attracts the most, let's say, clientele or stakeholders, I should say that these are observations. Of course, because I am seeing in the demand-driven basis. SATCOM applications, fine, everybody requires, whether your mobile or your banking or your OTT, entertainment, other things, it will be driven on its own by the demand. Really required to be discussed, and the platforms have to be created. Then coming to the climatic changes. Climatic changes, the opportunities, the loss of opportunity is huge. Because if you avoid something, because you are saying satellite data is more prominent to avoid so many catastrophes during the months, during the, let us say, the floods and cyclone periods. But how actually, they are reachable to the common public? Is there any common platforms where such kind of predictions are possible even by common man, by AMD? Because if after all it is a model which you have to develop and make it available to the people either through apps or through some means, so that they can experience themselves and they can try it and they can use their own, they can develop their own models. So the satellite applications through the sustainable development, especially in these areas, plays a big role. But out of passion, people start working. But out of, that is as a business, people should start working. Then only the sustainability of the program will exist. I leave it to the panel, very good panel we have. Rather than me talking on the subject, probably I leave it to the panel. I request all the panelists, they share their experiences and what kind of opportunity that exists, what kind of platforms that we can create, what kind of collaborations that are possible maybe with academia or with industry or with institutes across to bring out a sustainable, let us say, models for the sustainable development. This is very important for us because when I was talking to a couple of weather radar people, there are, I think, 4 or 5 weather radars, wind propellers available across the country. The amount of data that they generate up to 10 kilometers is amazing. And same case with our weather prediction models also. Let us see how this particular deliberations will go on. I seek your question answer session also towards the end of the session. please feel free to interact, give your thoughts, and so that we'll come out with good recommendations after this session. Thank you.
कर दी चेंज कितनी देर से इनकी रिकॉर्डिंग में शुरू
हाँ रिकॉर्डिंग तो
First I'll go to Stephane.
अभी चेंज कर ही दो
I think he has got a rich knowledge about these areas and he has worked a lot. I request you, maybe the questions are very small, but I leave it to you to share your experience. I put a typical questions. What are the sustainable development doesn't give direct revenues to the satellite providers? Because this is one area where every satellite manufacturer or satellite service provider says that who is the user? That answer is still unanswered. That question is still unanswered. How do you see the market and how do you work out the economy for such kind of applications so that the revenue model can be generated, the people who are working can be attracted with useful business models? The second question would be, what would be the share of such applications in the overall downstream market? Maybe I request if you just throw some of the thoughts you have in this slide.
Thank you, Sudheer. Yes, let me try and unpack some of that. So, my perspective on this is as an analyst who watches the satellite application markets. Euroconsult usually gets mobilized when a customer has money at stake and wants to know if his investment is going to pay off. I'll be frank, the Sustainable Development Goals, I couldn't give you a list. It's something I usually pay zero attention to. There's access to education in there, there's quality of life and so on. The problem is there's so much that is unsustainable and the political mandate behind SDGs is so broad that it's hard to find out where to begin. But at the end of the day, a lot of what happens in the market, a lot of what our customers want us to look at, turns out to correspond to an SDG or other. So I think it's easy to be cynical about those goals because there's quite a lot of greenwashing around. I was in another country recently and somebody sold me something packed in a plastic bag and there was a notice on it that said, we pack it in a single plastic bag to save the planet. And it felt like such an obscene case of greenwashing that I felt like slapping them. But we've gone a lot beyond that for, I think, two reasons. One is that the environmental issues have gone far beyond saving the polar bears to the level of saving ourselves, of protecting the food chain, the food supply, national security at many levels. I can tell you coming from Europe, but I'm sure it's also the case in India, the fear is there in public opinion when they look at the thermometer in the morning or where they open the newspaper and see that there's another wildfire that got started somewhere. All of that translates into political mandates and politics mobilizes money. The other thing is that as those mandates come along, industry responds, finds that there are revenue opportunities in there, that there are synergies with their own goals, and that as well translates into demands for information, which can be satisfied by satellite system. So let me give you a few semi-random examples. One of the biggest ones, and that is directly tied to climate change and to politics and to discussions about sustainability, is carbon credits and carbon trading. There's no carbon trading without assessments of carbon stocks, which mean assessing how many trees are in your country, the quality of the trees, how much carbon dioxide it can suck out, and in return for that, supposedly you get money. Your poor country gets money from the rich countries. You don't have to do anything, which is fantastic, right? It's almost free money. It turns out to be a difficult question to answer because forest inventories, it's easy to count the trees, it's a lot harder to assess the quality. And so forest inventories are still cutting edge for satellite, and I'll defer to the geospatial people who are more geospatial experts than me, but I think the science is still being done to assess identify there are 3 species, and how good the trees are relative to water stress and a million other parameters. Well, there's big money at stake behind it, and a lot of it is for governments which have a choice between logging and not logging or getting compensated. It ties into national priorities of land use, their political positioning in important UN forums. The climate forums are no longer places where just a few ecologists come around, but the heads of state go there, and so on. Another example is illegal and unregulated fishing. So in this case, it's protecting the fish stocks. That just happens to be one of the cornerstones of the food supply. And so I care about this. Anybody who eats fish, anybody who eats at all, has got to care about this. Governments care about this because, as you know well in India, given that the occasional fights between blue fishermen and Sri Lanka, bad stuff happens at sea all the time. And you don't want to be embroiled in border disputes with the next maritime power, and you don't want somebody to steal all your fish. And so space technology then gets mobilized to track illegal fisheries. The same people who steal the fish also happen to be, or who steal the wood, are also often part of mafias that bring other national security threats. We've done some work in an African country that has big national parks. Their sustainability, their environmental problem in this case was the ivory trade. And as it happened, it was the same people who also, they smuggled out the ivory, killing the rhinos and the elephants, but in the other direction, they also came in with drugs, with people trafficking and so on. The question was becoming militarized because those guys now were starting to hire helicopters to locate the elephants. And as a result, that country's armed forces were saying, we're going to go after them with our own fighter jets, and then it could easily escalate into armed conflict with the next country. They wanted geospatial solutions to nail that problem, find where the elephants were, not so much for the elephants' sake as to avoid the conflict with the next country, which happened to be bigger also. There was money for that, definitely. Another example is methane. So methane detection now is such a big issue that there's probably a dozen satellite constellations in service, in construction, in planning, just to track that problem. Methane happens to be 25 times a more potent greenhouse gas than CO2, and so it's a big ticket, and so it's reducing methane is a quick way of curbing global climate change. But it's also in the interest of the methane emitters to control those emissions, and they don't know which of their pipelines are leaking. Only satellites can really pinpoint that. There's emitters like landfills, which nobody knows where they are. For a city, finding better waste management is a big budget. It's usually one of the biggest budgets in a city budget. Making that more efficient saves money. Improving the quality of life in the city is not just for the people's sake. It's also because if you do that, then you can attract investors. And there's a lot of competition between cities to get multinational businesses to establish their HQs, and between entire countries. So now there's an effort in Saudi Arabia, for instance, to claw back business from the UAE. For that, they need to make their cities nicer to live, or people will not come. So all of this comes into consideration. The oil companies are the ones who pay for methane detection. Yes, there are government budgets for that. There is money from NGOs. It's not insubstantial. Some of those NGOs are very big. They have big geospatial teams, and so they are serious customers. But a lot of the money comes from the private sector for profit motives. Another example is meat traceability. The issue is, if I buy beef, it's been fed by soy, which has been grown on land in Brazil. It used to be rainforest. It's all been cut down. Consumers don't like that. They want meat traceability. The big meat purchasers, as a result, want to know where the meat comes from, and you have to attach little tracking sensors on the cows, on the cattle, to, sorry, in India, I know it's not a politically correct example, but We're talking about Brazil here. That's an industry sector, an application which had been waiting for literally decades to emerge. Another example would be in Australia with sheep. They don't know where the animals are. So it's an asset tracking case study, and it's only now becoming real because there is pressure on meat traceability. But I give the same example with timber. And finally, I think one of the SDGs is access to education. And so school networks, internet access at rural schools, and so on. So there are just two aspects. One, those tend to be really huge projects. Now we're talking tens of thousands of visits. With digital inclusion for rural areas and so on, there's money for that. Consumers are willing to pay for the internet access. And what's more, if you give them internet access in their countryside, two good things could happen. One, they could vote for you. That mobilizes money. So there's usually politics involved. More and more countries now realize they have to provide equal opportunities to everybody for economic reasons, for political reasons. Another thing that happens is, and I'll close with that, it's an example I was given in another African country. They said, we want to improve living conditions in those remote areas, because if we don't do that, the people will leave. And then they will go into the cities, which are already groaning under overpopulation. We want them to stay in their villages and not add problems to the capital area, because we can't pay for additional infrastructure there. And then the other thing that happens is, if they leave their villages, people from the next country are going to move into those empty spaces, and as a result, will lose control of our territory. At some point in the future, the other country might say, hey, my people are living in that piece of land, it's fine. And then problems never end. So that also mobilizes money, because it's national security. And that national security is a key aspect of the satellite market. I tried to give you a diversity of examples, because there's so many things we could talk about.
Nicely covered. The good points are about especially carbon trading, where even though India is not business-wise, is not so acclimatized for generating revenue to identify the carbon trading. Probably I think this is a very good market elsewhere, but a good stake can be taken by at least freelancers, knowledgeable people, to identify the carbon trading, deforestation. Eventually, reforestation can be done, including the mines areas, including the, let's say, urbanization especially. It's a very good point has come up. Now moving on to Group Captain Arvind Pandey, being in defense, I think you have a lot of experience in handling the extreme environments. Can you just throw some kind of your experience and impediments or what? Look at the
We are talking today about sustainable development goals, and especially in Earth observation. There are several goals which are to be followed as per the United Nations Charter. But then Earth observation remains a very niche area, and I will talk about some things wherein the remote sensing as well as the electromagnetic spectrum gives you a very good idea as to what can be done. Mostly I will like to talk about some things about microwave energy as well as hyperspectral spectrum. So now, as we know that the electromagnetic spectrum consists of all kind of waves, but then synthetic aperture radar, that is the microwave energy, is used for some kind of sorting out the problems of sustainable development goals. And the niche technology, that is the hyperspectral, that is also being used for some assets sustainability. I would also like to tell something about the Dr. Sudheer's organization, that is the CBPO. they have come out a document regarding what all researches can be done in space arena, and it is a very good document for the researcher people, for the academicians, for the industrialists to look for the problem statements and then give a solution. Being in defense earlier, I had faced a lot of problems which are given there in this, and when you go off from here, you can maybe you can still search what is the document which I am talking about, and you will find several use cases therein, and one use case of Earth observation I will talk about. So at some places the utilization of SAR will come as soil moisture and soil subsidence, which gives you a sustainability in the long term. So this soil moisture content monitoring as well as soil subsidence gives us sustainability. I am talking this more in this present context because you must have seen that I will use this. So you must have seen in the present context of heavy rainfall, a lot of things are happening in several places. The rivers are causing hindrances, the landslides are causing hindrances. So if we have to use this technology, then it will give us a very good I was talking about soil subsidence as well as the river watershed. So this is the great thing which is available as of now, but then we must utilize this. And the CBPO documents clearly spells out as to what all can be done in this area. When talking about hyperspectral, then a very niche area which is coming into foray is the mineral extraction. The availability of minerals, etc. So I was talking about mineral extraction. So this mineral extraction, especially, I will talk about something about lithium. In sustainability, when we say, as of now, you all must be seeing that lithium is the thing which is being driven for electric vehicles, etc. And all of the lithium is being imported as of now in Indian context. There is a trio which is called as which is producing this lithium, and India needs to do something about utilizing this hyperspectral imaging for the lithium extraction. Although I must tell you about 5 to 6 years back, there was thing done by NASA JPL as well as ISRO for monitoring the lithium in the Indian context, but then from space it was not done, it was done from the aerial platform, and now we have some companies available with the hyperspectral load in space, so I think that should be done for giving us the better sustainability and for the economic encouragement also. Now hyperspectral as well as SAR both are also required for structural detection. Now when we say that, I am talking about present context, that there are a lot of bridges you must be seeing that they are getting warped away and other kind of things. So when we monitor the bridges from the space, from SAR as well as from hyperspectral, we come to know as to where is the structural deformity in that bridge and other things, and that can be studied. Now all these things which I am talking about, they generally fall into arena of government. State remote sensing centers as well as national remote sensing centers are supposed to do it. But then for past 2 to 3 years, government has opened up the private entities, and private entities must come forward, take the data from NRSC or from the other sources which are available, and do these kind of jobs for better sustainability and better ecosystem. Now I will talk something about the geospatial platforms also, because this field, GIS, when we combine it with the imagery data, it gives us a very, very good result. So now you must have seen that in Google Earth or in Google Maps and all those kind of things, a lot of information is available. So this geospatial arena gives us a platform as to how to utilize this imagery data, whether it is for whatever use cases I was talking about, whether it is soil protection, landslides, mineral extraction and whatever. And we have similar use cases in defense also. A very common nomenclature you must be listening is the automatic detection of the time series which is happening. This use case can be made available for defense also, for civil application also, because as you know, space is a dual technology. Similar application can be held in defense, similar application can be held in civil application. Then when we talk about in present context, the river flow, the inundation by the river cost. So geomodeling can be done with help of GIS, and there are several platforms available in Indian context, in out of India context. So all these startups or maybe private entrepreneurs should look into this direction so that they can give some kind of help to the government, and when the government has opened up these things to the civil people. Now there is another document which I would like to talk about is the IDEX challenges, IDEX space challenges, that is the defense innovation challenges. There are about 80 challenges which are spelled out there, and all civil entrepreneurs can look into these challenges, and whatever I was talking about, SAR or hyperspectral or electromagnetic or electro-optical, all those challenges are there. So depending upon your area of interest, you can bid that, you can do that, all those IDEX challenges, and give the results to us.
Pandey, please.
Another thing which I was talking about, that is the data processing. Now we have the data from NRSC and from other sources, so we must use this GIS platform to give us the results. Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am. I think you touched some of the important and of course obvious areas where a lot of documentation and data is available online. If you see NRSC, the documents, I think more than 20 to 25 documents are available pertaining to, let's say, river indentation, land use, land cover, wetland mapping. I think these are all the things which gives an opportunity for someone. They have to carefully go through and they have to convert these this information into a revenue case or let's say value chain cases. Probably that could be the point. Many people ask me where I get opportunities. This kind of huge documentation, even he was talking about research area document which I have published. These are all the focused areas where ISRO is looking for some kind of let's say R&D proposals from the universities, of course, obviously universities. But in turn, they create some kind of curiosity and opportunities for other people. These are all the areas where the space technology can be made applicable for generating revenue. Now I move on to Abhishek. He is from Pixxel, very first satellite, I should say, flown from Indian side. Correct? Okay. And they have very huge aspirations as far as building of satellites and launching of satellites are concerned. And they are into, of course, geospatial constellations, such kind of huge plans. I'll ask him to share his experiences, use cases, technology, innovation challenges, and what you are going to actually penetrate into the system, what is the message for others, let's say startups, I should say, to take on in geospatial. Please.
Great, thank you so much. So I think, like Mr. Sudheer just mentioned, I will talk about this topic purely from my experience of having worked and built out Pixxel for the last 2.5 years. We're a hyperspectral Earth imaging satellite constellation organization. We build, manufacture, launch hyperspectral satellites, and we sell the imagery from that to different entities like governments, private organizations, resellers, etc. And I really specifically want to try and address, I think, the use cases have been made well known by the other panelists. Hyperspectral specifically has multiple use cases across the spectrum, and given that the SDG definition itself is so wide, it almost becomes applicable to every single application. What I would generally like to also maybe focus on here is, it's already established that there's a lot of data available, there are a lot of inputs available. The question then becomes what you do with it, and what is the format that you basically deploy to be able to use this data meaningfully for SDGs. And I can potentially talk about it from the perspective of the conversations we've had with different stakeholders. So lastly, just wanted to kind of highlight three main points here. Right? I think first and foremost is that the SDG effort generally, given that it's extremely widespread, is extremely decentralized in many ways. There's a different set of organizations across the globe, in the country, collecting different sorts of data. While there is a centralized dashboard that the government maintains around trying to track the progress across different SDGs, I think there's still some level of verticalized specialization that needs to happen in terms of how you measure it and what sort of inputs are being collected. A good example of that generally is also very recently Norway announced that they're going to put the deforestation bill for the entire world. They recently gave out a large satellite monitoring contract to a couple of private satellite organizations that are going to help them monitor deforestation across different parts of the world. So generally speaking, I think the first and foremost step that could potentially lead in this direction is to try and centralize this a little bit in a way that very, very specific inputs are specifically described that are going into kind of tracking these SDGs, and accordingly Geospatial, of course, can form an extremely important intelligence layer for every single one of these SDGs. The second thing that also Mr. Sudheer generally touched upon is the lack of data fusion, analytics models, etc. taking off, and that's where I think what's important is there needs to be a consortium of sorts where public-private partnerships, including academia, kind of comes together to try and build out a very verticalized stack for every single SDG. The Agriculture Ministry recently, has also been focusing on trying to put together an agri stack, for example, and geospatial data sets form an integral layer of that. Similarly, I do see the value of integrating hyperspectral data sets in other forms that already exist in the public domain into these different verticals, right? So what's really missing there is to be able to kind of put together an architecture where different sorts of inputs come in, you're being able to leverage the right sort of talent from academia, private industry and the government to then be able to build out models and indices that are very, very specific to a particular SDG that you're tracking, as opposed to just using satellite data or other inputs as a generic, source of information. And last but not the least, I think the most important thing here is also whether or not you're able to commercialize this, because at the end of the day, if you want to involve private industry and other stakeholders as well, there is going to be an economic component to it. What we are seeing increasingly, at least within the Indian government, is that there is an increasing willingness to engage and procure with hyperspectral data sources and satellite imagery generally. And this can effectively, like I said, be layered across different verticals and different ministries, etc. So the willingness to be able to kind of put together an economic model that works for each of these stakeholders is something that's extremely important. Potentially the government procuring this data set from private players, using them to build out the right kind of indices, but then also looping in academia to try and contextualize this for the problem that they're trying to solve is kind of a good, could potentially be a good model to be able to use this data set actively for SDG tracking. Pixxel specifically had also very recently signed, we ended up signing an MOU with the Ministry of Agriculture, where we're building out specific indices to help them track specific types of crops across districts. The idea here is also to try and engage with other ministries and then potentially try and centralize this to a point where every single SDG or every single mandate is being tracked closely. That being said, I think overall the experience with respect to satellite imagery and SDGs is an extremely affable and open one. There is anything and everything under the sun can potentially become a use case for satellite imagery. It's just about how you deploy it, what are the formats in which you're able to kind of capture it and analyze it in the best possible fashion. Right? So that's generally kind of been our experience with SDGs and with what satellite data can do for SDGs specifically. So I think I'll just keep it brief and stop there. Happy to take any questions in the end.
Thank you, Abhishek. I think one of the important things what recently happened is agriculture platform creation. In fact, Aerospace is also the industry. In the same way, let's say IMD or forestry or fisheries. Because one point what Stephane has brought out is very important. Illegal, there is a mining or illegal fisheries. That is one kind of revenue model the corporates can look at it. Because our navigation system tells more about shallow waters, whereas deep waters when you go, where international boundaries are extended. Since we don't have sufficient infrastructure, because most of the times the fish has to be processed on board and clean it and export it. We don't have such kind of facilities, infrastructure by and large in the nation. That is the reason the adjoining countries are plundering the treasure of marine, especially fish resources. We are helpless. I think that is the what kind of regulations we can bring, we really do not know, because they are all international waters. But the fact remains that our treasury is getting carried away by somebody. Of course, that is very important thing that we take it out. Dechacca is associated with AWS. We are also going to sign a MOU with them how to utilize the resources and different kind of clouds and other facilities that are going to be extended by AWS. I think they have good plans in India to collaborate with industry, to collaborate with startups and R&D institutions, to share their facilities and to bring out their technologies, to collaborate and work together. Probably I'll request Dechacca to, you wanted to say something? Okay, fine. Dechacca, how actually the opportunities of AWS can offer to the various stakeholders, and do you have any platforms or tools ready-made available, or are you ready to customize your tools co-working with the different institutions including ISRO? Can you just throw some light on that one?
Yeah, thanks, Sudheer. sir. So whenever it comes to sustainability and development goals, whatever mission a startup or a government organization has, how do you realize this sustainable mission is something that AWS enables? So what we provide is an end-to-end service to help you deliver your mission. First, whenever you're designing your satellite and your launch vehicle for a particular mission, we can actually provide you compute infrastructure, which is high performance computing, where you simulate or build a digital twin of your satellite or your launch vehicle and simulate inputs and extract outputs in a way that you're able to simulate like a virtual trajectory of the universe, orbit entry path, exit path. You can do all of those simulations on AWS high performance compute. This essentially helps you save cost before you can actually produce or take it to manufacturing. So that's one. Once you actually have your design ready, you're ready to launch, the most important thing comes is doing your launch operations or your mission operations. We can actually help you track your entire operations through our regionally spread AWS ground stations, where you can actually downlink data, track your satellite, whatever imagery around sustainability that you want to downlink, you can downlink all of that data and then build analytics, machine learning, artificial intelligence based models on that data to derive data products that suits your respective end users, whether it's government or agriculture or whoever's your end user. You build those data products on AWS. The problem that we actually solve is an end-to-end system that can actually help you realize your mission's goal. We have several organizations using AWS, and just to bring about a few examples, which I'll talk about in a minute, but what we've also done as a next level is we have something called as the AWS Open Data Registry. Most of the time, the challenge of building your missions or sustainability goals is availability of data. And this data could be weather data, climate data, agriculture data, it could be socioeconomic data, biodiversity data, any of these data sets. We have all of this hosted in something called as the AWS Open Data Registry. Now this registry is something that a lot of startups and government organizations access to build data models on top of it or different outcomes. Just to give you some examples, we have something like Satellogic building live Earth catalog every 24 hours on AWS, and this is a use case of geospatial data on AWS. We have different sort of Earth observation use cases like monitoring water bodies. We have a company called Blue Dot that monitors water bodies across Europe at just $6 on cloud for about data from about 7,000 data sets. They just pay $6. We have other organizations like, let's say, there's an organization that's monitoring solar energy produced by a farm through imagery, saying how much of solar energy does the farm produce by monitoring cloud cover, photovoltaic radiation, all of that. We have other organizations monitoring the freight shipping across ships, looking at the engine's power and the weather storms, etc., to maneuver the ship in the best possible route. We've also gone ahead and helped different space agencies, like let's say UAE Space Agency and NASA, to have different sort of missions, whether it's their Mars mission, exploring Mars through our AWS ground station, where they downlink data about the Mars atmosphere. We've also helped NASA in their Mars journey, which is downlink data of the rover's data, analyze the data and quickly provide insights to the rover on what should be the next day's activities. All of this done on the AWS cloud because it can massively scale. So From a sustainability standpoint, we offer data sets, we offer all the compute, we have storage infrastructure. You can build your entire mission on AWS, and we are happy to support you on that. Yeah. Thanks, Sudheer.
Thank you, Dechacca. I think I got a call from right side. Probably I think that half an hour it got delayed. Okay, fine. I think we have a very panelists, right, from satellite manufacturer, cloud, data management experts, commercial consultants, management and commercial consultants, and the users from defense. Good takeaways. Probably I have noted down, I'll pass it on to the organizers. One important thing is, what it has come out is, Mr. Stephane has talked about several aspects, how actually the government involvement will be there, which laws will provide commercial opportunities in the sustainable goals. Then Capt. Pandey was talking about the landmass, land user, disastrous mineral exploration. It is very amazing, because incidentally I was in IIT Kharagpur a couple of months back. It was one research came out in the Indo-Burman border. The 4,000 year one exclusive mineral has been identified. You don't know, as using hyperspectral imaging, what is the kind of lithium, what he was talking, Jammu Kashmir, it was there. And lithium recirculation, that is another let's say sustainable development, rather than just using it to letting it to the weather. If you can recycle the lithium mineral from the used batteries, silicon waste is getting dumped. You see in the newspapers, entire thing is getting dumped. Probably I think sustainability, rather than producing it, converting, recycling is another business, like SSS, space situational awareness, creating the nuisance and solving the nuisance also is becoming a business. Probably I think we have to see in those angles. Yes, multispectral, hyperspectral applications, we have not explored the possibilities of using structural political strength, bridges, dams. So such kind of things, how actually we can monitor using the satellite, artificial intelligence, or whatever the techniques that you use. Yes, opportunities are there. Of course, AWS is providing amazing services. Now they are coming out with so many resources and platforms. I think one has to make use of such kind of resources. Probably I think this panel has done justice, touching about various aspects in the sustainable development. I thank all the panelists for giving rightful and meaningful experiences and suggestions. I thank all the audience to be patient listening. One or two questions can I take, if you permit, because I have promised.
Please quick one question. Anybody from the audience has a question?
I just have one question. So one question on AWS, if you could just help. I understand that there are no ground stations in India. Correct. So how do you take care of regulations when it compares to downloading data somewhere else? I'm assuming that there are regulations which does not allow to have capture the images and store somewhere outside India. Is that how does it work? Regulation boundaries?
So the regulation is something we let the end customers take care of. What we provide is, we don't have a ground station in India. We have ground stations across in APAC, Europe and US. So you can, from a data residency standpoint, data privacy standpoint, if you're particular, so the whole point is to actually cover the entire globe from a ground station standpoint. So whichever is the closest ground station, you're able to downlink data with the least latency. So whenever you're downlinking data, if you would want to bring it to India, so it's usually the end user that takes care of the regulations, and all we provide is the ground station service. Yeah.
Anybody else? Okay, thank you.
Thank you. We had a very exploring session, I guess. Thank you, dignitaries in the audience and the panels, for taking out time and making this event a success. Now we can head for a 20-minute tea break, please, and we'll resume for the next sessions in 20 minutes. Thank you so much.